Hey,
How are you?
good. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Good. Hey, has surveillance ever impacted you in a negative way before?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I think it has actually. Maybe not me specifically, but my family. Um, I come from an Indian family, and so for things like going through the airport, we often get singled out because of the color of our skin to be surveilled extra or to have to go through more questioning. And there's nothing other than the color of our skin that would make that happen to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's my personal experience with the negative side of surveillance. Do you have one?
Um, I don't think I've had a negative experience, but I feel like now I'm much more aware of surveillance.
Yeah.
Now that I see it more and people talk more openly about surveillance, I feel like I'm definitely being watched more. So I feel like I in tune act a certain way without even thinking about it. Like it
Yeah.
reminds me kind of like the panopticon theory of like
Oh, okay.
being watched. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just really interesting how
Mm-hmm.
once you feel you're being watched, you tend to behave a certain way.
Yeah.
But I don't have any personal experiences. I think now like the technology that people use for surveillance is there's so much to know and learn about it, and it's always evolving.
Have you ever gone traveling somewhere where they had like CCTV anywhere and like you felt like you were constantly being watched?
Yeah, definitely. Like I've done a lot of traveling and I feel like in like last year I went to Thailand and we stopped in several airports, especially
Mm-hmm.
in China, and feeling like somebody's watching you when you're completely innocent and you're not doing anything wrong at all, it makes you overthink like every step and every move that you
Oh,
take, even
totally.
though you're not doing anything wrong. But
Yeah.
knowing that somebody's watching you makes you feel very vulnerable, very like insecure.
Mm-hmm. Totally. But I feel like it also can make you feel a little bit more secure too, because it's just like
Oh.
I don't know, especially like in an airport or something with all like the terrorist attacks that have been happening lately. Like so many of them were in airports, right? And like having that, I guess having those cameras out there, knowing that people are watching you, maybe that will stop some people from like blowing up an airport or something like that.
That's a really good point. I didn't think
Yeah.
about that perspective. But now that I think about it, yeah, it would make me feel more secure in an airport, knowing that they had security and they had
Mm-hmm.
surveillance, knowing that other people are being watched and it's not just focused on me. That's
Yeah.
a really good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah. On that point, like, are you willing to give up some of your like rights of like privacy in order to feel a little bit safer in an airport or some similar places?
That's a good question. I don't know. I feel like yes, but then I also feel like no. But I feel like if I knew like the guaranteed outcome of it,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, I would. Then
Yeah.
yes, I'd be more willing to like give up my own, knowing that like I'm in a safer environment and
Yeah.
that it's gonna actually benefit me as like a
Mm-hmm.
citizen. Then yes, I would.
Yeah. I
What about
guess
you?
I can give an example because when I was in Paris this in March, we went to the Louvre and apparently there was some sort of online threat to the Louvre that there was gonna be an attack on the Louvre, like a terrorist attack while we were there.
Really?
So the whole like museum went on lockdown and like there was these big metal doors that just like closed in around us and we were like, oh, okay, we're stuck at the Louvre, and we were there for like 9 hours, and like nothing, like nothing went on the PA system or anything like that, telling us
Hmm.
what was going on until like we figured it all out later when we did some research that there had been some threats to the Louvre. So like I guess like people, the fact that they had been scanning and like doing those searches to make sure that people were safe kept us safe in that situation. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was no attack, and I don't know if it was that they stopped it from happening, or with the doors closing, or if it was something like that. It was just like a fake threat or whatever it is. But whatever it was, we were safe in that situation because of the surveillance.
That's a
So
good example.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I can't say I've ever been in a situation like that before, or at least one that I haven't been aware of that's
Mm-hmm.
been going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like the day before the attack on Brussels airport. So it was like,
Oh, okay.
like things were pretty high, and like right after the attack, like everything, like everywhere we went, there was scans to scan our bags before we went into buildings and everything like that. We had to give up a lot of our privacy, but right after the attack, and we were in Europe, and it's just different. Like especially being in Europe, it was different than in Canada. Like I probably wouldn't want to give up all those rights, like even just to go into a shopping mall in Canada, but there it felt like it was making me safer because I was like, yes, they're scanning my bag, but they're also scanning the bag of the guy who has a bomb in his bag bringing it into the mall. So,
Right. Is that because, do you think because in Canada you know how safe Canada is and going across seas you're unaware of that environment?
yeah, it might be. Like I feel like there's a higher level of risk when I don't know the place and I don't know the structure and the governance and all that kind of thing. I feel like there's definitely a higher level of risk there than there is here. And also just because of the terrorism right now, there like Europe specifically had been like under fire and from terrorists, and Canada is like less so. So there was definitely a higher risk, and I felt more comfortable giving up the privacy because of that risk. So.
That's a good point. See, how do you feel free when there's so much surveillance around us? Like how do you
I don't know. I guess it's a really hard question. I have like, I did some reading a while ago. I don't remember what the book was called, but it was something about how there really isn't any freedom anymore. Like we've lost our freedom in this surveilled world, and there was a lot of examples given for like, for example, there was a school in the States that handed out MacBooks to all of their students to use for schoolwork, which was awesome, and everyone was like super excited about it, and like so everyone was using these MacBooks. But what they didn't know is that the school had put spy software on the Macs, and so the cameras were taking a picture every 5 minutes. So some of these cameras caught things like kids changing or having a bath, or like all of these different things that are happening with the camera going off without these kids knowing. And like
Wow.
it became this big scandal once it came out, because obviously like there's some of that's child pornography and things like that that they just obviously cannot be showing, and they can't be getting it without the consent of these children. But then like they found out that all these children had consented to it in the terms and conditions, but people just pass over that, right? Like,
But they weren't
so
fully aware of what they were signing over
yeah,
to get the computer.
exactly. And so that's the thing, is there's something in the Canadian Privacy Act where there is different levels of consent. So there's like basically it's not considered consent if the person who consents could not have the right knowledge for it. So for example,
Like a minor?
like a minor, yeah. So like for a kid's website, so say like a Disney website or something, say the Disney website asked the kid who was playing on the website to consent to give their email and their address and whatever, all of this information. The kid's gonna say, yeah, of course, I want to play my Disney games, so I'm gonna say yes to that. But that's not actually considered consent in Canada, because the child does not have the right, like, I don't know exactly what the words are, but the right like psychological
Like the
development
ability
state.
to understand what they're actually handing over when they sign consent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like if that case in the US had happened in Canada, I don't know if it would have happened, because they're like, I don't know if these minors would have the ability to consent to giving up their privacy through pictures being taken all the time, right? And none of the kids noticed that this was in the terms and conditions. It didn't come out until the lawsuits came up later, and like until then. But I think in the end, like the students won, even though it was in the terms and conditions. But there's like even more different situations like that, where there's like people who like for for an example, when Facebook Messenger became an app on your phone separate from Facebook, there were new rights that you had to give up to use Facebook Messenger.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there are like a lot, like they're in the terms and conditions.
Like I don't even know that, and I use it.
No, I just like found it when I
Wow.
was doing some research. So it was really weird to figure all of it out, right? Like I found out that the information that you give away is like they can have access to your voice when you're on the phone, and they also have access to your pictures, and they have access to your camera, and it says like even when you're not using the app, like you're giving away those rights. So like
Wow.
they can listen to you at any time when you're on the phone, and
So they hold
like
a lot
that.
of power.
Exactly. So it's like every situation where you had freedom to your own privacy is kind of gone. And like, how can you be free without privacy? Like, I think that's really what the real question is. Like, what do you think? How do you feel free without privacy?
Oh, um, I don't know. I guess I just think of like all the technology that we use on a daily basis that we're using to for whatever purpose, like for efficiency or for like our hobbies or and for like social reasons. And I don't think people really understand the the
Implications.
implications. Thank you. The implications that come along with that, right? Like even
Yeah.
though you're using it like on your phone and you're using it and you think it's like on your own device, but however, just like Facebook, they actually own a lot of the content that's like streaming through their application.
Totally.
But I never think about that when I use it. When I send photos, when I post like information, I think feeling free is almost like an idea in the world that we live in today. I don't know if I've ever, I feel like because we live in Canada and we have a lot of like civil rights and like we have a lot of flexibility, definitely more than other countries do. I feel like we're at an advantage, but when it comes to technology and what we use, I think it's really underestimated what we're giving up for the use of that technology. So I don't know. That's a hard question. Has there ever been a time where you felt like the government has like misused your information or done something with that information that you weren't aware of?
Oh, totally. I don't know necessarily about like me personally, but I found out through some census data that was being misused, and it was in the States. But I think there's a lot of parallels in Canada of what like how things are being used. I don't want to say for sure, but I could imagine that they would be using it similarly. So apparently during the Second World War, there was like a census that went around in the U.S. and all the data was brought into one place, and then they ended up sifting through all that data to find out where Japanese immigrants were in the U.S.
Oh,
And so
wow.
they like singled out Japanese families, and I don't know what they did with that data, but they did end up like aggregating just the Japanese data into one place so that people could like use that data and know where all these Japanese families were. And like that's just a complete misuse of that data, because those families are American families, and just because they have Japanese like backgrounds does not mean that they would be fighting with Japan in the war.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's been other cases like that too. Like in 2001, I think it was 2001. It might have been 2002. The U.S. did something similar where they found out anyone with Arab descent, and they sent like that information was put live on the internet for anyone to see. So like, it's just like bringing up the ability for the everyday person to be like racist to the people around them, and like just because of where someone's from does not make them a terrorist or
No.
fighting for the other side or something like that.
And it's interesting too when organizations are using technology to gain data and then to like make like to conform their own like conclusion with that data and then to act upon it. So
Totally.
it's like actually like the surveillance that's being put together, people are actually using that as like evidence to like make choice, to call upon wars, to like to make like world changes happen, which is crazy. Like it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially when you think you're giving up that information for a different reason. Like for census, you're thinking you're giving it up so that you can, like, funding can be put in the right places in the government based on like what the population needs and things like that. But when you realize how some of the data is actually being used, you like suddenly I don't really want to give up that information anymore.
Yeah, it's really similar to like when back in the 1500s in England, like when they first started doing like census and civil registration, like the government used it in a negative manner against citizens and they didn't know about it until afterwards. And I feel like even looking at in history, like how much it's developed, but how like organizations are still using the same practices and theories over and over again that have been used like 50, 60, 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just like, it's revolving, which is really interesting.
Yeah, but there's also not, like, no one's fighting back about it, right? Like, it's the same thing. Like, we're willing to give up information for certain reasons, and we just have to figure out what those reasons are and what, like, where it's so hard to figure out how we can really, like, feel free and feel like we have our privacy and that kind of thing when we're willing to give it up for so many different reasons. I don't think it really exists anymore, privacy.
No, I think the world we live in today jeopardizes privacy for like a multitude of different reasons. And I think a lot of those reasons are like out of our control, like just as citizens, like we don't have that control or that power. Like the bigger powers to be do.
And it's also interesting when you think of it like on a more personal level, because like obviously talking about census data and all that kind of stuff seems very like, it seems like bigger and wider than some smaller instances, but there's been instances where people have purchased data that people give online for like the purpose of stalking that person. Like, I don't remember what the names were, but there was this person who lived in the States somewhere, and they purchased their ex-girlfriend's information, who like moved away and got a restraining order and everything, and they purchased all the information from some third-party company and then used that information to stalk that person.
Really?
Yeah. So it's like you can like your information, even if you think it's going to one company, can be purchased. And like, so
there's like, it makes me think of this app, and I forget what it's called, but it's like you and your partner or your family can download it, and then you can, it's like a GPS on your phone, so you can see where the other person is at all times.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, and I forget the name of it, but a friend of mine at work used it, and during our break, he was like, oh yeah, my wife is down at the Eaton Center downtown, like she better not be buying too much clothes. And I was like, how do you know that? And he's like, oh, look at my app. And it's literally like, it's like a red flashing symbol where like her car was moving.
Wow.
And I was like, you're watching your wife like when you're at work. But it was like, he's like, oh, it's just so she knows where I am and I know where she is with like my son. And like to them it was totally normal, but to me I was like, why do you need that though? Like, like 100 years ago, would people need that? No, but it's like people use these technologies for their own personal motives, but I don't think they realize like somebody is probably watching them using that technology, right? And somehow, some way that could come back to them. Yeah. Or, yeah, it just really made me think about, freedom and privacy, and I don't think we have a lot of the control anymore. It's scary, but anyways.
Yeah. Any last thoughts?
No, I just think all of this really makes me think about the bigger picture. Like when I go traveling, when I download an app, when I post something on Facebook, when I'm down at Dallas Road and I see a drone. Like I think of all those things now of like who's watching me, why are they watching me, like how do they have access to my information? Like anything now, I feel like I'm much more aware of like my surroundings and like the devices that I use than I was before. What about you?
I don't think so. I don't think I have anything else to add, but I feel the same way as you. I feel more aware of all these things, and it's a little scary. Yeah.
Thanks for sitting down with me.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a good chat.
See you, Bria.
Bye.